Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning on driving value through digital transformation. My name is Mark Wilson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Unity 5. I've joined the organisation relatively recently. My background isn't in parking. My background is much more in technology and in transformation. But I'm delighted to be with you today with an opportunity to talk to some of our customers and some of the people in the sector and explore a topic which I think is top of most people's mind in this sector and many others around how do we drive value using technology and what are our challenges and what outcomes can we hope for. Today we do have some questions in already and some structure that we'll provide to the panel conversation. But if you have any questions yourselves, anything you'd like to add, then please add it into the QA box, which I'm reliably informed should be on the panel interaction software, and we'll try and weave those questions into the conversation as we go. So just to move on and introduce the panel, I'm waiting for the slide to click on. Excellent, good. So joining me today, we have Ian Vail, who's a Programme Manager at the London Borough of Camden. We have Alastair Finlayson, who's General Manager at Gemini Parking Solutions. And we've got James Hampton, who's Product Manager at Unity 5. And we also have lurking in the wings, Hannah Fuller, who is our Head of Strategic Partnerships at Unity 5 and helping me on the webinar today. So without more ado, what I'd like to do is introduce the panel, let the panel introduce themselves, perhaps to give them a brief introduction of themselves and their background. So perhaps we can start with Ian. Can we bring Ian in?
Good morning, I am here. Hi, my name's Ian Vail. I am a Programme Manager at Camden Council within their Parking Operations Department. I have been in Camden's Parking Department since 1997, where I started as a data entry clerk, inputting handwritten PCNs into what I think was Sanderson's then, and also doing loads of filing of paperwork. So since 97, I've seen certainly loads of digital transformation kick off, some of it which I've been involved with. Some of it obviously is very policy driven. So I've been kind of involved with all of that sort of stuff through procurement. My main focus is around like getting contracts in, service reviews, operational reviews, and how we can use technology to maybe improve service delivery, not just for our back office or our contractors, but also for customers as well. So it's those three key areas. Okay.
Excellent. Good to have you with us today, Ian. And Alastair?
Good morning. So yeah, Alastair Finlayson, General Manager of Gemini Parking Solutions. Started in the parking industry in 2016, so only 7 years experience under the belt. I know some people have been here for what feels like an eternity. I started at Gemini sort of doing similar to Ian, sort of started at the bottom and worked my way up. So my first role was appeals administrator. So whenever someone was issued with a parking charge notice, reading the appeal in a session and making a decision. Since from then to now, I've done a bit of everything: account management, dealing with clients, managing their expectations, project management in terms of implementing any new parking schemes that we're winning business of, and sort of now overseeing pretty much every aspect of the business, which is great career advancement. I've even been out on the road and issued PCNs in my time, so I think I've been involved in almost every single element of the private sector to a degree.
I have to say, hearing you two introduce yourselves reminds me that since I've been in the sector, the number of people have said to me that once you're in parking, you can't get out of parking has been quite significant. So it definitely seems like a sector that people develop in.
It's what I get for doing music at uni.
And James Hampton from Unity 5, we bring James in.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm James Hampton. I'm the product manager here at Unity 5. I've been here for 6 years, and similar to what Mark said, that means I'm only a fifth of the way through my life sentence in the parking sector. My responsibilities are mainly around looking after the development team internally here. I started over on the support team, so dealing with issues with our clients, moving over to business development and onboarding new clients and local authorities coming on to use our products, and then merged over to the development side of the company. So I've had a nice wide exposure of probably every department in the company at this point. But yeah, my now sole responsibilities are looking after the roadmap and handling stakeholders to deliver the new bonuses to our products.
Excellent, very welcome, James. And I think it'd be possible to get Hannah to quick introductions, because she's hopefully going to pop up during the conversation. It'd be nice to give her a chance to introduce herself. Do we have that?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Hannah Fuller. I'm here. I am head of our commercial partnerships, commercial relationships at Unity 5. I've been in parking for the last 8 years. I spent a lot of time in cashless. I work predominantly with our suppliers and our partners. And technology is something that I'm really, really passionate about. Those who know me probably have seen me speak about it quite a lot. And I think that we're actually going to find some really interesting things out through this webinar. Today I'll be helping to field some questions. So if you see me pop up, or if you've got any questions, please pop them in, and I will do my best to facilitate that side of things.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Hannah. For those of you who try to do these conferences, certainly virtually, it's very difficult to collate questions, read questions, keep conversation going, balance everything, keeps plate spinning. So it's great to have Hannah helping us today. That's great. Now we've got at least, I think, an hour and a bit set aside today, but we'll try and keep things within the hour as best we can, really, because I'm conscious of everyone's time, but hopefully we can make sure we get the value out of the conversation and we ask as many questions as we can. Let me kick off the session then, perhaps with a bit of context. As I said, today is all about driving value through digital transformation, and I think we're all acutely aware of the challenges faced at the moment with the cost of living crisis, and we've all heard recent stories in the news around the funding gaps of core local authority services, with many authorities now depending on revenue services such as waste and parking really to help plug gaps. So focus on the revenue side is perhaps more acute than ever, and therefore arguably it's never been more important really to look at sort of new ways to drive value. But of course there is a tendency to think about value only in monetary terms, and that's not the case at all, of course. There are lots of sources of value. So one of the questions in my mind is about how we balance this idea about protecting revenue whilst at the same time driving or delivering higher value services. And I think that's probably an acute challenge in the local authority. So let me turn first of all, I think, to you, Ian, if I can virtually turn to you at least anyway. Perhaps you can start off, if you can tell us a bit about how these sort of funding challenges are impacting Camden, and how you and your team are really trying to work to ensure that you're doing as much as you can to support the residents, delivering good service, whilst at the same time, you know, either working within the funding constraints or trying to plug the gaps of the funding constraints.
Cool. Yeah, I think the key thing to sort of say from the offset is that obviously parking is not a revenue generating service within Camden. It's such statutory, we can't, you know, just make income through our enforcement or, you know, our collection of revenue either through paid for parking or permits. It's there to serve a purpose, and that purpose is really some of the statutory objectives, you know, making sure there's road safety within the borough, you know, ensuring there's, you know, reduced deaths, accidents, you know, that comes all about with the parking restrictions we put in place. There's also, you know, a certain scheme works that come into play over time, which kind of, yes, it does increase an impact in revenue, but generally you see a curve go down. So you get an increase as compliance improves, it comes back down. So that's obviously changed the way we kind of forecast on where our revenue and our surplus is. So I was kind of interested in, when we were talking last week around our annual parking reports, thinking, you know, I haven't actually looked at those historically since they went live, and we have them historically going back to 2002 and 3. And it's interesting seeing kind of where our revenue was going from that point to where it is now, because at that point we were introducing all the CCTV kind of moving traffic, bus lane enforcement. And of course, that's a digital transformation in its own right from the standard on-street protocols that we were using. So inevitably you see that peak of revenue coming up. Obviously there is a cost of that increase in PCNs, but then with that dereg that happened in about 2008 and 9, it kind of chomps down a bit. So that's why we weren't allowed to use CCTV for on-street enforcement and various other bits and pieces. Yeah. And then, you know, you can see that again creeping back up, maybe more recently, kind of with the Healthy Streets campaigns that are going on within London, low traffic neighbourhoods, all of those schemes that again are introducing higher levels of CCTV enforcement. But again, I would stipulate they're there to ensure compliance with those controls that we're putting in place. And it is compliance to deal with those policy objectives of, like I said, road safety, reducing, you know, road deaths and accidents, improving the air within in London, especially within Camden, because we're in a city. And it's quite bad. So, you know, there's been all those sort of like schemes put in place for that. Running parallel with that is obviously your emissions-based charging, which has come into play over time, sort of from like early sort of 11, 12, I think we started to introduce them, maybe a bit later than that, but certainly using like DVLA data to kind of implement that. You know, diesel surcharges was that first sort of key thing. More recently, it's more about your engine size or capacity, etc. And all local authorities are implementing those types of schemes in varying ways. Islington, interestingly, introducing their car battery, I think it is tariff structure, you know, the bigger the battery, the more energy it drains, the more you're going to be charged for it. So there's different things that are coming to place to look at that revenue. But then it's really the cost of running that service. So obviously that's changed over time. And like I said, I used to be a data entry clerk entering handwritten PCNs. We don't need to do that anymore. And, you know, we're trying to get people to write in via online and not actually having handwritten correspondence. So all of the management of those operations have obviously diminished over time. With that as well, and just areas that I've been involved with is machines. So obviously we started using cashless in 2011 with Ringo. And at that time, I think the business case was going to see really low volumes of cashless coming in. And of course, it just exponentially went up. So the need for machines and their maintenance costs, you know, the fact that machines were getting broken into, the fact that machines were getting ripped out of the ground, leaving like live wires, all of those things kind of needed to come out and change. So I was kind of involved with how you can get rid of machines, testing that out and removing that kind of hardware and moving it more to a digital function, which I think, you know, majority of authorities are doing. And then there's certain other things, which is customer delivery. And it is, you know, we are serving the residents and the businesses within the area and visitors who come in. So it's trying to improve that service delivery. And I think one of the key drivers that's come into play at Camden is about that self-service kind of provision. So managing to book your permits online, manage to book your parking on your phone, all those sorts of services have been kind of bolstered up. So I think, you know, you can see drops in our operational costs when we got rid of parking offices. So I know certain authorities have parking offices dotted around their boroughs to support their parking operations. We removed those sort of in 2010, I think, and moved over to a Contact Camden, which is more of a centralized corporate model of dealing with customers. So again, we kind of manage that fluctuation within revenue, fluctuation with, you know, austerity cuts and all of that through those sort of operational kind of changes. And then I suppose the final thing is quality. You've talked about value. I think, you know, it's not worth issuing a bad PCN if you're just going to cancel it and all the resource that's involved with that. So trying to make sure that the PCNs that we are issuing are of a good quality, that we're not cancelling off bad PCNs is also a key driver. So making sure the enforcement, how we deal with correspondence, you know, you don't want to have people writing back because they're not getting an answer. So that there's various nuances in there in terms of how we manage maybe the demands on the service, ensuring that our surplus can be maintained because that surplus does support our highways, does, you know, support kind of taxi cards and transport for disabled and elderly and schools, etc. So obviously we do want to maintain that as part of a service and as a council. So I think that's kind of a nutshell on that bit.
No, look, I mean, that's really good. There's a few things that spring to mind on that, and we'll come back to some of those wider strategies. I know we've had a question about curbside management, so perhaps we'll come back to that later on. And I like your reflection on sort of where we've been. I'll come back on that later myself, because I think that's a really good way of looking at technology and this idea about really focusing on the management of cost, but also getting the right PCNs through the system. I think that's very interesting. Let's bring in Alastair at this point. I mean, Alastair, you're both a a parking provider in your own right and also a supplier to local authorities. So do you see, or to what extent do you see this sort of impact of the value dynamic in the work that you do with your customers, and also thinking about your private parking experience? You know, is there anything playing on your mind, I suppose, at the moment with the current proposals on the code and the code practice? Is there anything that you can reflect on that in terms of how you think about the value that you can bring and the value that you generate?
Yeah, so I mean, off the bat, there's a lot of synergies between some of the information Ian just shared with us all. I can remember manually entering a handwritten PCN, and that's back in 2016. We was using tech, but there were still some people that had the old books and a digital camera, and you had to plug that into the computer and file all the images in the correct folder and enter the handwritten PCN. So, perhaps that just Gemini was a little bit slow on the uptake of tech. But I think, the value side of things, the more digitalization you have, the more value you can deliver to your clients. We very much look at delivering what the client wants and, keeping the end user's journey at the forefront of anything that we do. And with our customers, some of them, they just want to make as much money as possible out of their car park. Some of them just want to get control over it and make sure only their customers are parking, things like restaurants and pubs, for example. And then you get people that just want somewhere in the middle where they want to give value to their customers in the form of free parking, but they want to generate some revenue from that. And with, the use of adopting digital platforms, the way of separating the customers becomes a lot easier. And I can think back to 2016, 2017, a restaurant chain that we was working with. Everyone had to pay for parking because it was a operative patrol location, so everyone had to display something in the windscreen, and it wasn't ideal for a customer to have to go into the restaurant and then come back out and then go back in. So the solution that we was using at the time was the old refund stub. So they go to the payment machine, purchase their ticket, display one half in the windscreen, take the other half into the restaurant, and then had to reconcile that back as well off their commissions. So it just became a lot of paperwork and a lot of admin. But as soon as we could digitalize that, having mobile payment apps, even a payment machine for Joe Public that want to park in the car park, but then for the customer journey, all they need to do is from their car, walk straight into the restaurant, provide their vehicle registration details to a member of staff, or they can even self-manage it as well. And the end user journey becomes a lot more seamless. And then from the customer standpoint, when it comes to administrative duties, it just falls off the edge of a cliff because they've not got to get involved in anything. The operator takes it all over. And so you mentioned the parking code and, the concerns that I'm sure the majority of the industry have with, the prospect of potentially lower PCN values. I mean, bit of a strange place to be in, but I think it's amazing how PCN is immune to inflation. The rate it's going, a pint will cost you more than a PCN, which is just absolutely bonkers. But that's not what this conversation is about. I just wanted to it's amazing how PCN's immune from inflation.
I thought you were saying that we need cheaper pints. Sorry.
Well, that's always a happy alternative. But yeah, with that, as an operator, we're looking at our capex for any contract that we sign, and we're weighing up that risk. And now more so than ever, everything's getting a lot more scrutiny on the budget because we're looking at, okay, if the PCN 60 or £100 snapshot of time, but then going a year in advance, and there's potential at one stage, I think it was as low as 40 outside of London. You need to start factoring that into your calculations. And I'm sure every pan display provider that's watching this will absolutely be cursing my name, but pan display machines are just expensive. And it's hardware that, there's a capex up front, you've got the install cost, you've got the maintenance cost, you've got the operational management of them. With a private operator, you've got a larger playground than a local authority that just manages their borough. We're nationwide. And having to have that operational logistics to manage this hardware, which could be, north of Scotland all the way down in Cornwall, you need to make sure you've got that resource. But as soon as you digitalize things, that all goes away. Yeah, you'll still need to make sure that you've got someone popping to site to make sure that everything's presentable, no one's vandalized the signs are still there and clear. But you've also not got so much emphasis on having to manage hardware, and then if that breaks down. So it just allows for a more seamless experience as well as scalability. If you was to roll out, if you've got something cloud-based, you can roll that out across 500 car parks. Yeah, you've got the OpEx to manage that, but even with hardware, you've got OpEx, but then you'd have CapEx of, 500 odd machines across all these car parks, which, now more so than ever when everyone's really watching every penny they spend just because we don't know what the future holds.
I think some fascinating points there. I mean, I really like this idea about being able to sort of tailor your service based on the different types of end customers that you've got. I think that really resonates with me, and how I think about, what smart things you can do with digital, but also that reflection on actually, in many respects, the circumstances which drive the change in your business model. Partly it's brought about by things that technology can do that are new, but partly it's brought about by things that are outside our control, and environmental impacts, whether that's government legislation or whatever it is, that then forces a change. And again, that sort of idea that actually we can flex our business models, it's certainly a private world, to take best account of the new circumstances. Look, that's really interesting, and some of the points that you come out again, come out of here again, sort of reflect on my own, personality, my own experiences, and I guess moving the conversation on a bit onto the transformation side, just to sort of give you a bit more color about my background. I mean, I've worked in software and services and SaaS my whole career. And I've worked in different industries. I've implemented technology at public sector, at private sector, albeit outside the parking sector. And I'm also lucky to have worked in many different countries. So I've seen an awful lot over my years in the sector, or in technology. I've seen an awful lot of really good examples of positive changes, and seeing how we can drive new outcomes. And you've just touched on that, I think, brilliantly. Ian, Alastair, your example of just new outcomes that we can deliver that technology enables. And that's, to me, very much the essence of what technology is about. It's about helping people do things that they couldn't do before, introducing a new way of thinking about solving a problem, or indeed just doing the same thing, but just doing it more effectively or more productively than the past. And I also reflect on how often we get a bit bogged down in the moment with technology. And sometimes you think actually the pace of change is quite slow. But Alastair, Ian, your point earlier about reflecting back on, in fact, both of you actually reflecting back on where you've come from, what you've done, and the roles that you've done, and Ian talked about the reports that you had back in the day, where you were 3 years ago or 5 years ago, the technology you were using 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I think most of us would say today that if we had to do the jobs that we're doing today using the technology that we had 15 or so years ago, it would be pretty galling circumstance. I don't think any of us would relish that. So I'm very much, having moved into this sector, I'm very much keen to carry on this sort of agenda about transformation through technology, and see how we can continue to support change and growth at Unity 5. And probably, James, a really good moment then, or opportunity to bring you into the conversation. I mean, you've been, as you said, at Unity 5 a number of years. You've done a number of different roles in different departments, so you must have witnessed a lot of the challenges that faced with sort of evolving technology and how to keep things current, and witness firsthand the sort of highs, I guess, and perhaps some of the challenges of enhancing day-to-day operations, either local authority or private operating customers using technology. So perhaps we can bring you in now, and you can share some of your experiences about sort of instigating change.
Yeah, sure. Cheers, Mark. So obviously it's mainly about taking advantage wherever you possibly can with technology, and trying to streamline those legacy processes, but also kind of those existing tech processes that are a bit clunky, maybe not the best way of doing things. And usually with transformation, it all kind of stems from an idea, especially within our sector. It comes from an idea or a question or a conversation that has been had. And the goal of those conversations are really kind of predominantly down to three things. It's around enhancing the efficiency within teams. So how to do more with less. It's about trying to reduce administrative overheads. So how can you assist your teams and get more productivity, again, by doing less, while, considering those costs that you haven't necessarily got the resource to do these things. But the main thing is to try and not really affect the end consumer, so allow them to still engage with that positive experience. I think that the main the subject of our sector is driving compliance. So you're not affecting the compliant motorist. It's about giving them that good experience. And as long as when you're making these transformative changes that you're kind of not affecting that end user, looking to progress things, then you're going to do okay. I mean, we all know that within local authority, there's a lot of legislation, and it's a very process-driven environment. And my involvement around kind of local authority has been about understanding those processes and implementing our services in order to assist with those processes. So we had an example recently with one of our clients. It started as a question. They came to us and asked about it was school truancy. So they had, obviously with the reducing costs for local authority, they're kind of picking up more responsibility. So they are now responsible for the school truancy and the issuing of those notices. And they asked us the question of, could you help with this? Is there something that you can do? Can we kind of digitize this process? And as they were previously writing out the notices by hand, sending them off to the recipient, and then putting in reminders in a calendar, and then coming back to that process, and then having to do another letter, etc. Whereas we kind of took away the idea and thought, yeah, we can help with this. There's certainly something that we can do here. And we worked closely with them to kind of digitize that entire process. So now the only thing they kind of have to do is plug the information in initially onto a digital platform, and then the system does the rest. They don't have to revisit the process. They don't have to worry about going back and sending notices or depending on calendars to remind them when to do certain actions. And again, that, I can keep stressing it, came from just a question and that early conversation. For the private sector, it's my involvement's kind of been around onboarding clients. So with new clients, new operators, it's somewhat relatively simple, because they kind of come straight into the sector using our tech firsthand, and it's about educating them how to adopt the practices. But for maybe a more established or a longer serving operator who are kind of set processes and they've had the same processes for a long time, it's about working with them and understanding those processes. So the example I like to use with this one, and going back to what Alastair said, where only 7 years ago they were typing in PCNs manually, a similar process for this in the private sector was around transfer of liability. So when you might have owned the vehicle, be the keeper of the vehicle, but you weren't necessarily driving, it used to be a very manual process. You write it on a form, you send it off to the operator, and then they transfer the details to the driver of the vehicle. Going forward a few years, that became a very automated process, in the sense that the owner of the vehicle could then go onto an online portal. They could plug in the details, and then they could submit the transfer liability digitally. And then the admin staff would be obviously responsible for actioning that transfer liability. But going even further ahead of that, and this is a good kind of example where technology has really transformed and bettered an already digital process, is we now have the ability to perform kind of lookups to a central fleet database. So the idea is that the PCN is raised, and then it's automatically submitted to this central fleet database, and then the details are returned, and the transfer of liability is submitted automatically, because the details are already stored there on an online database. So again, that's where you've kind of had the same process that's kind of gone through 3 life cycles of existence, and we've come to the best solution so far. And what I find interesting about that's only over 7 years, is with a lot of these technologies we have in the sector, where is it going to be in like another 7 years? So it's always continuously improving. And the more that you digitize these processes, again, it becomes easier to kind of report on it and obtain that data. And I think that's a lot where the sector is going. We all know that data is exceptionally important, and it drives a lot of the decisions made. But it involves for less guesswork. So whereas the local authority sector is very kind of process driven, and they act through legislative changes, and with the private sector, with the code of practice, a lot of the decisions now are based on kind of data and that data driven approach. So working on factual evidence and making decisions that way. So for example, a retail park might be recording the type of vehicle, and it make, model, color, emissions, and seeing those types of vehicles that are coming into a car park, and making informed decisions on whether they need to introduce more EV bays, or maybe more blue badge spots based on kind of enforcement around blue badges. And so that data is able to drive better decisions and streamline those processes. So, but while they kind of, the data drives those decisions, it's also very important that you've got the infrastructure in place to kind of facilitate those changes. Alastair mentioned like the scalable rollout. So if you onboard 500 clients, you're not going to be affected by any impact of bringing those 500 on board. But having that infrastructure in place from the beginning and making sure that you are choosing your partners correctly and considering the future, you are very much enabling yourself to be a part of the transformation. You are going to be able to move forward with the times a lot easier, because especially with SaaS, the rollout of these new features and these new kind of benefits can happen seamlessly. There's no downtime to it. You can roll it out via cloud-based deployments. It's no longer on-prem solutions where you have to book in a day for a maintenance team to come out and then block out half the day where your staff can't do anything because they're having to perform updates. Gone are those days. So it all stems from making the right decisions with the partners and getting those infrastructures in place.
James, that's very interesting. I'll probably come back if we get time on some of the points you raised about that sort of ease with which we can evolve solutions to accommodate new problems, like the truancy point that you made. Also, the ease of which we can enhance things like self-service and through things like Fleet to give people more control. Again, simply to deploy and simply to roll out. But we'll come back to that. I want to bring in some of the questions that we've had, and just a reminder that if you've got any questions, put them in the QA box and we'll try and get to them. We've had a couple of questions really, which I think probably come back on the points around specific examples of using technology out either on the on-street world or in the parking world. So a question from Toby Hiles from Grid Smart Cities. So he's asked a question about bringing in opportunities to use on-street curbside management and how that impacts congestion flows and balance the management of on-street and off-street parking. I think, Ian, this probably comes back to some of the points you were making about the other sort of initiatives and things that are impacting the borough and the opportunities that you have with technology to help address them. Before you just come in on that, an additional question that's come in from Mike Westwood at Dorset, who, if I remember rightly, was suffering from a bad back at the start of the week. So I hope, Mike, your back's better. But a similar question, really, but this time specifically on car parks and looking at transformation. I'll bring Alastair in on this point as well. But just to start with, Ian, do you have sort of examples of technology that's helped this sort of on-street, off-street, and maximising the efficiencies? Or are these areas that you're particularly looking at right now and strategies that you're trying to explore?
I would say corporately, yeah, there are strategies that are kind of developing. I mean, I know a lot of councils are looking at curbside management strategies, like what is the value of the curb? What's the value of the land adjacent to that curb? How does that translate into the way we charge for use of that curb? There's things going on there that I think are probably different charging models in the future. But I think historically, I've always been interested in GIS, in mapping the curb properly. And we had a project where we were trying to make online parking bay suspension self-serve. And we wanted to do like a kind of cinema seating selection. So you can select parking bays against the curbs, and then that's what you have as a suspension as a way of controlling it and seeing who's taking what. And within that model, we kind of increased the cost if you book out more spaces. So it gives you an idea for the customer. So, well, actually, hold on, I'm booking out way too much. How can I reduce that cost? How can I reduce my own efficiencies in using that curbside space? Yeah. And I think that was a good exercise very early on to try and really look at that curbside management piece. I still think there's a lot of work that needs to do on it. I mean, I know the likes of Appyway and Buchanan are kind of working towards that end goal. Certainly the APDS, that Alliance of Parking Data Standards, the way we're standardizing data so that all, suppliers, councils, all singing from the same hymn sheet in the way that we apply business rules to that curbside management. I think that's a key area of development. But certainly, yeah, I think it's important, and I think we're about to go out to consultation on fees and charges and various other sort of terms and condition changes to our products. But the key thing we're trying to get is, the curbside is not just for motorists. We're trying to promote like cycling or walking, or we're trying to promote just greening the curbside and utilizing that for different purposes beyond the car. So trying to manage those controls is another way of kind of looking at that. In car, what's coming out of that? That's like leading on to data aggregation services. So we've been interested in that over the last few years, not quite utilized it yet. I know some other authorities have had more success in that, but really understanding the movement of vehicles, like where's the A to B journey coming from? Are they coming out of Borough, intra-Borough? All of those sorts of questions are starting to come up. And because we're starting to get that data, and I agree with James, data is the key thing, that's what we need to utilize both our policy and our operational objectives in terms of that management. And I think that's the key thing that we're kind of looking forward to. But I still think there's, just taking it from a local authority perspective, using a UPRN, like a unique property reference number for addresses, that's not used across all systems. So for an example on that, looking at cost of living, we're trying to identify those people that might be impacted by an increase in fees and charges due to cost of living. How do we identify those? How do we integrate our databases to understand the impact on those residents, or indeed businesses that might be impacted by increased charges, how we can make better efficiencies for them? So I think that there's loads of questions still kind of open out of it, but it's definitely data on that.
I think the data side is really interesting, and actually on the supplier side, again, it's top of mind for us, I have to say, but it's also because we get the way our system works inherently, we get the data because it's all our customers are using our technology, and it does allow us to help our customers work with data, and it allows us to help customers benchmark. We can't share data, but we can benchmark positioning data, and I think that starts to add a whole load of value and hopefully inform business cases. And actually, Alastair, if I can bring you in at this point and really perhaps go back to Mike's comment about technology in the car park. I know that at Gemini, you've grown really quickly, and I think you've done that by embracing technology. And I am aware there's a difference between how local authorities can apply things like ANPR and how private providers can. But do you want to give us some insight into how you see technology in a kind of efficient modern car park environment, and how that can enable a better customer experience, as you alluded to earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big projects that we had 2022, back end of 2021, was about how can we take existing schemes that we're operating in and digitalize them with the use of ANPR, just because for our clients, our customers, they see a higher level of compliance in their car park, they then get more revenue in turn. When you've got a sort of patrol service and you're only getting there maybe sort of once a day, there's a lot of people that will take a chance and they'll get away with not paying. And so by digitalizing all the processes, allowing us to use ANPR, it drives compliance up for visitors of that facility. And what our clients have actually seen, sort of now we're sort of 12 to 18 months on from when we adopted that, they've actually seen a significant increase in their revenue just by sort of digitalizing that, using the ANPR technology. I'm sure it's no secret, the majority of the private sector, I would hazard a guess to say, uses ANPR, and if they don't, I'm sure they're looking into it, because it's, don't get me wrong, it's not a silver bullet solution, but it's really one of the best tools at driving up compliance. But not just that, as Ian alluded to with the data, you get such valuable data from the ANPR solutions that you can share with your clients. So, for example, retail parks, you can let them know how many vehicles are passing through each day, what the average dwelling time is, and then they can use this data when they're looking for new tenants for one of their units to say, our car park has X amount of vehicles coming in this day per day, they're staying for this long. I think your shop would be a perfect fit for us. But then you can go dive even further into that, and what James alluded to with the make, model, color. Not to sort of make assumptions, but if you're seeing a lot of new expensive cars in a retail park, you would make the assumption it's an affluent area, there's a lot of people that have got disposable income. Whereas if it was sort of, perhaps older cars, not as fancy, then perhaps the sort of more budget retailers might see that as a bit more of an appealing location for them to set up shop in, because of the clientele that we can see from all the data that we're capturing. And you really only would get that with an ANPR solution. Whereas, I don't think any operative really pays attention to how many cars are in a car park and what type of cars they are. All they really care about is have they paid, or have they got a permit, have they broken the rules. Oh, they've not broken the rules, fine, we'll leave them alone. Or oh, they've broken the rules, we'll issue a PCN.
I think that's I think it's great, and it actually makes me reflect on actually the use of ANPR can, for example, can be used in a wealth of other ways rather than just necessarily for the offence as well. As you said, just making informed decisions or assumptions about how to use the space. And Ian, maybe just quickly worth reflecting on admissions-based charging. That must be something that's playing on your mind, given you're in the London Borough.
Yeah, and I think, having DVLA data, which, can be hit and miss, but generally it's got better over the years in terms of its usage. We know there's falls out with it, but we've definitely seen, as we've introduced emissions-based charging, a reduction in high emissions vehicles coming down. It's clear evidence that we're kind of following that through. Yeah. And that's obviously underscoring future policy objectives and how we deal with that. And it's a positive result. So I think we can only prove that policy with that data. Do you know what I mean? We've got to have that to kind of generate more things on it. And we're about to roll that out across all products. So it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts on paid for parking, where it's just a flat rate, etc. Although we have tariff bands that are higher in the centre of London as you go out to the north, but to see how that amends over time, changes that motorist choice. Do I want to come in and pay that amount of money, or do I want to use public transport, which is one of the key policy objectives we're trying to endorse. So I think it's just interesting to see it kind of flesh out in that and actually see the impact of it over time. I think that's the key thing.
Again, that looking back thing, seeing how things go. Hannah, it's probably worth just bringing you in here. I'd be interested in any comments that you've got from your experience on the data side, and also any reflections on questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I remember doing a lot while I was in the cashless world was looking at how the data that we have can influence the decisions that we make with technology, and which features to implement. What works best where. And I think some of the comments that we've had prior to the webinar actually was asking about the differences between car parks and on streets. I think there's also a huge difference between local authority car parks and a difference between hospitals or universities and even like rail and leisure and commuter. And I think that's a really interesting point in actually how we use technology in different parts of our parking environment, because what works best where. I know, Alastair, you run lots of leisure, and actually tech works great in your sector, doesn't it? It's really strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, you probably utilize it more in leisure, I would imagine, than you do in some other parts, because actually it suits the duration that people are parking for. And we don't know all of that detail until we look at the data. Yeah. And I know there's some ex-colleagues on this call of people I used to work with, and there's some of the guys that we partner with, and it's something that we have a lot of conversations about. How data can inform our tech choices, and we look at it internally, I think, as well, quite a lot. Is this car park an ANPR car park? Will it benefit from ANPR? Does it do the right type of transaction? Does it do the right volume of transaction? And I think it's something that we're starting to look at even more. Does the cost to park merit the technology, or actually should it not be important what the cost to park is, because compliance is important irrespective of the cost? And I think that's a really interesting point.
No, I mean, I agree. And I also think, actually, as you made the point about adoption of ANPR, and I think actually there's probably a ways to go there. I think there is a huge opportunity for more adoption in the private section as well. And the thing that I've noticed is the speed of technology change on the hardware side, on the camera side, allowing us to be just easier to install, cheaper to install, easier to connect up. And I think that in itself opens up a whole raft of opportunities on how you can apply technology. I'd like to get back to a point that James made earlier about this whole thing about the ease of which we can pivot to something new, and also the ease which we can introduce a new scope such as self-service. And I know from my own experience that there are times when you live in the breathe in the digital world and the technology world, that actually you can't bring about the change that you wanted. The implementation didn't go the way you'd hoped, or you just can't move quickly enough to bring something new. You can see the need, but you can't move quickly enough. And often in those circumstances, I've noted that at some point you reach this digital inflection point. And I am kind of old enough to, well, not quite old enough to remember mainframe. I grew up on client server, world. I grew up in a world where business applications had everything sort of loaded on the client side, and that's how user interface was driven. And I remember installing our first internet connection in a company in the late 1990s. And the thing that struck me about the internet in the late 1990s was it was incredibly slow. And so the idea that you could host everything in the cloud, the idea that you could run your application in the cloud, and the idea that your whole user interface essentially would be browser-based at that time would be completely alien. Again, it's this idea about looking back from where you've come from. But I think it is by introducing this kind of new technology that has given us this inflection point that's allowed us to say, actually, do you know what? We can manage things by cameras in remote car parks because we can capture the data in a certain way now that we couldn't physically do before. Or, we can extend our services really quickly and get everybody updated on the latest technology. So James, just to come back in on your experience on the product management side, you must be frequently talking to our customers or indeed people in the sector about the features and the requirements. You must have that experience of kind of in our world in terms of working with what is pure SaaS technology. So have you got any thoughts on sort of, how to accommodate, I guess, future change, leveraging SaaS and the benefits that can bring from the world that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I am very much involved pretty much from the beginning. So I act as the voice into the development team for the customer. Not always the customer, it might be other stakeholders in different areas of our business. So it could be from a support related call, it could be from a demonstration with a local authority. So it can come from different angles. But my sole kind of area is to have that responsibility and understand the requirements of let's say a new feature. So what is the end goal and what is the problem that they are trying to resolve? From there, I work closely with them, ask the questions and make sure that we are developing the right thing and not going down the garden path with something else. But, we like to work closely with clients, and we kind of understand these opportunities from things like, exhibits. ParkX is one of the ones through our account management team, like I said, support team. But we also do things like user group meetings where, although it may seem daunting standing up in front of your clients, we get massive value out of visiting them on a kind of quarterly basis and just seeing what the priorities are at the moment. Once we kind of take an idea and we kind of run with it, it's then about managing expectations. Okay, so a lot of SaaS companies will run with a roadmap. We certainly do. We tend to only kind of have a quarterly to 6 month roadmap though. We are a very agile company in the sense that the sector's frequently changing. Like I said, the technology is transforming, so a lot is changing very quickly. And because we work in an agile sense, we are able to kind of pick things up quickly. And if there are any, legislative changes or changes to things like the code of practice coming up, we can adopt to those changes nice and quickly. And that's the beauty of a SaaS product as well. I think with some providers, not necessarily just within the parking sector, but, software as a whole, they'll have an annual roadmap, and they wouldn't be able to get anything in for a year's time, and they kind of back it up for that long, which is an interesting approach based on, the ideas that you have in your roadmap that are a year away came from a year ago. So a year before may not be what's important right now, which is why I think we kind of, we work closely with our clients to understand what's important right now. At the same time, is kind of providing that scope and the roadmap for a 3 month period. We're very agile. We like to make sure the priorities go to the top. Once you've kind of worked with the client and understood the solution, it's then about developing the solution. So again, working closely with them along the way, making sure that you are getting it right, and eventually you get to the point where it's ready. So then you get the importance of a smooth rollout. So working with them, making sure there's documentation, making sure that they are trained on the product, maybe a bit of that hand-holding process and making sure that they have a good experience of adopting new technologies. And that's where the kind of SaaS really comes into its fruition. You know, there's no downtime with deployments. You can deploy as frequently and as often and as you can. Because of that, you don't have to, you are able to make fast changes. That agile environment works well because you're not restricted by, you know, on-premise solutions or outdated solutions. You can literally do it there and then live and make those fast changes to the environment. I enjoy seeing an idea come to fruition, delivering it, and then receiving the feedback, seeing how the client reacts to it, seeing how it's improved their processes, made their days better, saved them time, whatever it is. But there's also that kind of post-delivery responsibility of ensuring that you're taking any feedback on board. So, you know, we appreciate we might not always get things right first time. There might be better things that we can improve on, things like user experience or a better UI. So put the button in the top right-hand corner instead of the top left-hand corner. So it's about working closely with them and understanding the requirements. So we usually find that if one or two clients benefit from something, then the wide range of our clients will benefit from it as well, because, you know, a lot of the processes are very similar. And then I think where we can kind of think for the future and how to think about digital transformation is, especially for the local authority sector, it's around that kind of tender process, I think. I think when a lot of tenders are written, they're kind of written with what they currently have in mind.
That's a really good one. Yeah.
They kind of they're built so they need it to do this because that's what they currently do. Whereas it would be good, I think, in the future to consider what do you want it to do, or, you know, how can you improve what you're currently doing instead of just finding parity with what currently exists. And I think what that will do is open up a lot more conversations, and you know, that's like going back to what I said earlier, that's where these kind of digital improvements come from. It's an idea, it's a conversation or a question had somewhere. But along with that, you know, a lot of the suppliers have the responsibility of educating gaps where a local authority or an operator might not be utilizing a bit of tech that is available. So I know that we have an account management team that work closely with the clients. They do kind of like system health checks and things like that, basically to ensure that they're not missing up on opportunities that are available to them. So they might still be performing manual processes or using outdated bits of technology. And, you know, we work closely with them to ensure that they're adopting what we have available and driving value wherever possible.
James, that's great. You touched on a whole raft of points there around, you know, speed, agility. I love that comment about sort of, you know, writing roadmaps a year in advance for something that was a year ago, the requirement, and that idea about being able to optimize, help customers optimize, because in a SaaS world you can see the data, you're hands on. That's kind of really fascinating. I also really, that comment you made about the tender process, and that's not unique to parking. I can certainly tell you that, having worked in public sector procurement in a number of organizations, it's always that challenge of, you know, you want to kind of sell the vision, but you have to respond to the here and now. And I don't know, Ian, as our representative from local authority on the panel, have you got any comments about that sort of procurement challenge, I suppose?
I don't think there's enough time left to talk about. I think there's so many things in that in my experience we've come across, and I totally agree with James. I think there needs to be a different approach to procurement. I've always thought that. I think there is an exercise with specifications where they're so rigid and they don't really explain what the customer or indeed end user journey is. And by end user, I mean back office operation. So obviously we can, you know, if we're looking about, you know, saving on resources, we want much more efficient processes internally, as well as we want efficient processes for the customer to kind of educate them to use them. So, you know, and I know in Camden, we've gone out to develop our own systems, both for online suspensions and more recently a parking permit management system. Internally, it was an exercise. I'm not saying we're successful on that. We need to use suppliers out in the market to improve on what we're doing, and make sure that those suppliers are actually fit for purpose to do what we need to do. And we don't necessarily have that dialogue necessarily in a very clear and transparent way between the council and the supplier, if that makes sense. Certainly, feedback loops, and we keep talking about that, it's the key thing for me. And we don't necessarily have that going on in a very good way, I don't think. This doesn't work. How do we change it? When do you change it? All of that sort of language. Certainly, I think in terms of customer delivery, and especially looking at digital transformation, obviously one of the big things that came out of central government recently was people still use cash, people don't have phones, all of that. We still, as a council, have residents who are digitally excluded. So how do we bring them on board?
Absolutely.
What levers do we have in place to bring those people on board? And that sits essentially with the suppliers just as much as it sits with the council. So how do the suppliers embolden that direction? How can we educate the suppliers to maybe, and I've been thinking more recently around social value, which we have to build into our contracts, is, can you use social value to implement schemes to promote digital inclusion for those people? Does that make sense? Or simplify the processes under which you book a permit, or you make a paid for parking transaction, or you pay or complain against the PCN. There's tons of stuff in that. But definitely that's the exciting bit for me. That's the bit where we can make these changes. And I think it's the more we work with suppliers, or the local authorities working with suppliers, central government, whoever, we can work towards to getting that. That's the main drive.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think this opportunity to work collaboratively in a supply chain to think about new innovation, because it's often difficult in a tender to write what you want if you don't know what you want, because you don't know the art of the possible. And Hannah, probably a good opportunity to bring you in here, because I know that your world is partnerships. What's your reflections on this?
Yeah, my world is partnerships, and a big part of that actually is speaking to local authorities, but also private parking guys, to understand what they need to achieve. Because at the end of the day, we build technology. We're experts in tech. We're not experts at being on the ground. And I think that's the biggest thing, that we need to make sure that we're building stuff that actually delivers what customers need. And the more dialogue we can have, and for anyone who's on this call who's a customer or a potential customer, I know that if we will have spoken to you, we will have said to you, talk to us, because that's really important for us. But Ian, I know through stuff we've done in the past together as well, that dialogue that you have to ensure that you get what's right or best, or delivers best customer experience and customer service. Because at the end of the day, we have our customers, but all our customers have their own customers. And it's so important, actually, we represent your brands. And that's how we work in partners, definitely. We've also had a really interesting question that kind of comes in around that, is that use parking now touches lots of different parts. Ian, you've just mentioned social values. It also really involves digital transformation in a lot of local authorities now. And actually, how important, Ian, do you think it is that we bring in those digital transformation teams when we buy new tech? And what kind of balance is there? Because what we need is really, we've heard today that tech is only as good as the people that use it in some respects, and we need to use it right. So how do we make sure that we get it right and get the right balance?
Like I said, I think we've been experimenting at Camden. We're developing our own systems, and I think we've been stung by the lack of experience within our own teams to do that. However, those teams are responsible for, data protection into those systems, councils like Hackney that have been stung by all of those sorts of things. So I think it's trying to find that balance between what we need to do statutorily and protecting our residents' data, right, and making sure that those things are in place is definitely key. Certainly, I work quite closely with our IT team to make sure that specs are up to spec, up to specifications. That we have a supply chain assessment, which is huge for people to fill out on, and I'm reliant on them to have a qualitative view of that, because that's where it goes above the top of my head. So I think there's definitely a strong involvement, and we have a relatively strong IT team to support that. I know certain local authorities don't, and I think that's where things can fall down a little bit. I think the other thing is maybe even like G Cloud frameworks, you know, they go through a process of selection to make sure that they are operating at the best levels. So I think we're wholly reliant on some of those sort of standards when we go out to procure. I know certainly our procurement teams prefers to use a framework because they've gone through that rigorous sort of testing in terms
like
of
the pre-checks.
The pre-checks, that's the word I was trying to say.
These guys do what we need them to do. Their tech is legit. No, I think that's really valid. Yeah, super valid.
But yeah, I think that's it from my side on that.
And we're coming. We said we do the hour, and we're sort of coming. We're just slightly over the hour. I'd like to just sort of, I suppose, think about some closing remarks. We have tried to weave in as many of the questions that we had as well. I think we've done artfully well, actually, weaving questions in. But I think we've managed to keep on top of what we've been, some of the dialogue that's been inbound. Perhaps close on a bit of a what are you excited about in the future question. I mean, Alastair, you've been driving tech. You're at the forefront of things. What are you looking at down the road, thinking, I can't wait to get my hands on?
To be honest, the thing might be a little bit of a hot take, but the thing I'm looking forward to probably hasn't even been thought up of yet. You know, I feel like to a degree we had this huge pace of technological advancements in the last sort of 4 to 5 years. You know, power and exit has become very standard now, whereas when you look back to when I started in the industry, there was very few providers offering a power and exit solution. So I feel like we've had a huge technological advancement, and it feels like at the moment things have got a little bit stagnant and there's nothing groundbreaking. So I'm just really at the moment looking forward to that next sort of sprint of when we go from here to sort of way up there with where tech goes.
Yeah, that's interesting. We always have a saying in the sector that the person who's going to knock you off your perch is currently a kid in a garage somewhere, screaming something up, right? And I think that's actually literally true in terms of the tech sector. Great, and Ian, anything that you're looking at in terms of great and the good next tech things that get you excited?
The first thing up on my list was self-drive hover vehicles. To fly around Landwood, I think definitely will help us move around the borough more efficiently. But of course, loads of congestion probably in our areas. I don't know. I think, like I said, I think for me, it's data aggregation and honing that data down and seeing it across vehicles, across LiDAR, ANPR, all these things, getting it shoved into one so that we can actually see a proper map of the area, like a digitized map of everything and how people are using the road network and how we can kind of make improvements on that. I think that's the key thing. And that's certainly what like I said, I'm kind of excited about of diving into a little bit more. Not that I'm quite there yet, but that's the area that I think can unlock something. I am a bit of a data junkie, so I can go down rabbit holes, but it's like, if you can get it and source it and use it for policy and operational objectives, I think that's all well and good.
And you can see enormous opportunities for connectivity there as well, extending out sort of ease of use for widening departments as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing, that integration, those API integrations, how you bring all that data in, getting that view is definitely important as well.
No, that's great. James, you got anything to add on what's hot to trot in your mind?
I think the obvious one for me would be to mention AI, machine learning. I think it's a very clickbait topic. But for me, I'm going to be interested, and this is not just within parking, this is just within my personal life as well, but I'm interested to see where AI is going to advance. I mean, it's advanced massively as it is now. Everybody knows of ChatGPT and Midjourney and things like that. But I'm interested to see how it will be adopted in the parking sector and whether it can be adopted. And if it is adopted, how it gets regulated by governing bodies or by the government. So yeah, I'm interested in that.
No, that's excellent. You're quite right. And I'm actually impressed that we managed to get to the end of the hour and a bit before we mentioned AI. So that's good going. Maybe I don't know that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the thing. I think an observation for me, just to reflect on the end, and I think Alastair, listening to you, it's very interesting. I understand completely where you're coming from in terms of you're looking for the next wave, but I think interestingly, I suspect the majority of the people are playing catch up to where you're at and where your thinking is. And so actually there's a huge opportunity to sort of bring everybody up to sort of enjoying that kind of technology, use of technology that you do. And some of that is like legislation constrained, I understand that. But nevertheless, there's still that sort of great way of thinking. I think that's it. I think we'll wrap it up there. Hannah, we've sort of done the questions. in which case, it's only left to me to say thank you very much for everybody. I'm absolutely delighted. I've really enjoyed this conversation today. I've learned a lot, and I think we've sort of tiptoed well through the topics. A huge topic, lots more we could talk about. But Ian, Alastair in particular, really thank you very much for your time today and your insights. James, Hannah, likewise, thank you for the contribution, and also to the wonderful people at LiDAR who helped set this all up for us. So that's really good. Thanks also to everybody who's joined us today. If you've got any questions, any matters arising, anything you'd like to raise, please contact us. We'd be happy to follow up. And please look out for sort of future conversations that we might have. And if you've got any ideas for topics that you'd like us to cover, then again, please feed that back to us. We're always looking to say how can we make valuable use of time. I appreciate we take a chunk out of people's time to do this kind of thing, and we have overrun on our objective, but nevertheless, I think it was very valuable. So from me and everybody else on the panel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.